happens to be about 9 months older than I am. Okay, so and she happens to be from St. Louis, Missouri. So yeah, there's a lot of connections there, a lot of history that related to it. The guy that wrote the novel in 1971, I didn't know much about him. Started looking at it. He was also from St. Louis, Missouri. I didn't know that. Now, at the time that Linda was cast for the role, I believe she was living in Connecticut. You got, I don't want to see a show of hands, but I can raise my hands. But I assume most people have seen the movie The Exorcist. At least some trailers of it, some adaptations for it. It actually had its basis in a case, an actual event that happened in America. It happened in Maryland in 1949. It wasn't a girl, it was a guy. His bed wasn't moving and all that. But furniture was moving around the room. And so the Catholic Church, I think the guy was actually Lutheran, but the mother took him to the Catholic priest, and they actually did, he got permission, actually did perform an exorcist on this individual back in 1949. Don't know his real name. He's called Roland Doe, as in Jane Doe, Roland Doe, but we don't know much about him. 2016, the Fox TV network, they launched this series called The Exorcist, and it's back for a second showing in 2017, second season, so it's there. Flip Wilson, okay, who is that guy? The devil made me do it. Dressed up as Geraldine quite a bit, but yeah, his frequent claim to fame was his saying, "The devil made me do it." You know, he had his own variety show. He appeared on Ed Sullivan, Laugh-In, and so forth. You can just keep going. Johnny Carson, and so forth. And hence the rub or the enticement. We have a lot of events that happen in our history, unexplained events that are abnormal. And it's frequent to use the idea that demon possession was the result in those acts. In other words, let's just give it, you have abnormal behavior that leads to very bad consequences. Adolf Hitler, for instance, Charles Manson, for instance, Ted Bundy, for instance, the Boston Strangler, Adam Lanza back in 2012 that mowed down those 20 kids at the elementary school in Connecticut, the Aurora movie theater shooting in Colorado, okay? People acting outside of the normal society, okay, doing very wicked things. It's very easy to say, well, the reason for that is he was possessed. Something entered in his mind. The other reason for its popularity is it's a way to rationalize indecent conduct. In other words, you know, we make fun, you know, Flip Wilson made a career out of making fun of the devil made me do it. There are some people that actually do believe that their sins are a result of an evil spirit entering them, causing them to do wicked things. Not just things like taking lives and so forth, but going into evil, indecent behavior. What about demons? What about possession? What's the real truth? Did they exist? What are they? There's basically three classes of theories relating to demons. The first is that it's just an accommodation language. In other words, in the Bible times, you had this sickness, this mental sickness, and didn't know what it was. They had superstitious beliefs, so they tied the two together and said, he's just possessed. It's a demon possession type thing. It's not really real, it's just some mental disorder in a person. The other idea is that demons were just there. They're not part of God's creation. They're just evil spirits, evil that abounds in the world. And the Bible doesn't give us any information regarding their origin or background. And the third one is that demons belong to God's order of creation, but have been consigned to the evil spirit world. And there's several variations on that. Just the two most popular ones are that they're the fallen angels that talk about in Jude verse 6, 2 Peter 2, 4. And the other one is that they may be evil men, spirits of evil men, wicked men that have been allowed to roam the earth, okay, or at least were allowed to roam the earth. As we get through this lesson, we'll address that last part a little bit further on. I'd like to, this morning, look at it from 5 vantage points. First off, it is a prominent subject in the Bible, okay? Both the Old Testament and the New Testament actually deal with demonology. Particularly the New Testament, there's several references to demons, devils, and evil spirits. Okay, so we'll actually look at those. What I'd like to do is talk about some basic truths about the subject of sin and responsibility. We got to understand that first, because to run over there and come up with a bizarre theory and then bring that theory back and try to fit the scriptures into it, that doesn't work in any circumstance. What you need to know is what the scriptures say, and then if your theory is off base from that, cast it aside, throw it away. It's not right. And so I think it would do well, particularly on this subject, to lay the groundwork on basic sin, on what the basics of sin is, and the basics of responsibility for those sins. The second thing is to discuss the first two theories. They can be dispensed very rapidly, okay? They're false. They're not true. Then I'd like to look at 3 separate accounts about the man that was possessed with the legion. All three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, actually have an account of that. We're going to read through all 3 of them, depending on how time goes, and make some discussions about that and draw out some information from those. I'd like for us to look at some current theories about demons, depending on which book you pick up. Rex Turner has 5. 2 of his are actually probably 1. He just splits it a little differently. Jack Cochran in his book has 4, and we'll look at those common current theories about demons, and then we'll discuss demon possession today. Does it happen today? He said in the back, Brother Washington frequently points out that people today try to pass the responsibility of their sins to others. It's been since the Garden of Eden, okay? It doesn't stop. And even today, men want to blame other things for their misdeeds. I didn't do that. It was the way I was raised. It was my environment. I needed something. That's why I committed that sin. We frequently don't want to absolve ourselves of responsibility. But the Bible teaches that is not the case. If you look at 1 John chapter 3, verse 4, it defines sin as a transgression of the law. Okay? So there's a law that's written. It's God's law. If you violate that law, it's sin. James chapter 1, verses 14 through 15 tells you how it happens. We have lust. Okay? We entertain those lusts. We give into those lusts. And we sin. And unless we take care of that sin, unless we repent of that sin, and avail ourselves of the blood of Christ, we will die. That's what James 1, verses 14 through 15 says. Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. I think I quoted the American Standard Version, but what's the King James say? And come short of the glory of God. Okay? Sin is a violation of God's law. It's missing the mark. It's done by the person. No matter what the circumstances, a sin is a sin, okay? The responsibility for sins are ours. Started back in the Old Testament, but the passage I pulled out is Ezekiel 18, verse 4. It's also in verse 20. He gets a little more detail in verse 20. Verse 4 says, the soul that sins, it shall die. Verse 20, he talks about the fact, if the father sins, it's not the son that's responsible for it, it's the father. If the son sins, it's not the father that's responsible for it, it's the son that sins. And he concludes that analogy with the statement, the soul that sins, it shall die. Okay? Romans chapter 6, verse 23 talks about the wages of sin is death. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 26 through 27. We use this frequently talking about those who may slip away, turn away from the church. But that passage actually has a dual meaning, and it talks about anybody that rejects the sacrifice of Christ. It says, for if we sin willfully after we've received the knowledge of Christ, there is no more sacrifice for sins. Yes, Andy? Yeah. Different degrees? No. Different punishments? Yes. And there's some passages, in fact, in Hebrews he talks about those who reject the sacrifice of Christ will be under a more severe punishment once they've known the knowledge, come to the knowledge of the truth. But if we reject the sacrifice of Christ, we abide in sin. There's no more sacrifice. Okay. But only a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation. That's what Hebrews chapter 10, 26 and 27 says. Romans chapter 14, verse 12, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, both say that we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, and we must give account for the deeds done in our bodies, okay, whether they be good or evil, whether they be good or bad, okay. Okay. Men may want to attribute their sinful behavior to Satan or to demons or even others, but the Bible is very clear that the person who commits sin is responsible for his own sins. And if the sins are not repented of, he will lose his soul in hell. I've just touched the iceberg on it. We could spend the rest of the time going through the scriptures to verify what I've just told you from the scriptures. There's a lot more to it. Okay, let's talk about the two first theories. Okay, let's dispense with them pretty quickly. Demons in the New Testament were more than just biblical accommodation to people's superstitions with respect to certain diseases. It's true that primitive cultures attributed things that would be like mental illness to a evil spirit possession. That's true. That happened in some of the primitive cultures. You see that particularly in the cultures of coming out of Africa and Haiti. Saw that a little bit in there. See it in New Orleans, and that parishes around there a little bit, particularly those that practice voodoo. But consider that there are some 80 references in the New Testament to demon possession. Okay, and 11 of those instances, it clearly distinguishes demon possession from physical or mental illness. We're going to look at two. The first one comes from Matthew chapter 4, verse 24. You may remember what happens in Matthew chapter 4. Leading up to Matthew 4, Christ is baptized, okay, by John the Baptist. He leaves. He goes into the wilderness. The first part of that chapter deals with the temptations that he undergoes. He's without bread and water, fasts for 40 days, 40 nights, okay? Satan comes and tempts him at the end of those 40 days. After that temptation, then he goes out and he starts his ministry, his public ministry. Verse 24 talks about his results, okay, of his ministry. It says, and his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought unto him all sick people that were taken with divers diseases and torments, and those which were possessed with devils, and those which were lunatic, and those that had the palsy, and he healed them. Okay, so there's three distinctions that are made. Those who have the devils, the lunatics are the crazy guys, okay? The palsy, that would be more like the epileptic type people. Okay, three distinct classes of individuals talked about in Matthew 24. Let's look over in Matthew chapter 8, okay, verse 16. It's even more plain there. When the evening was come, they brought unto him many that were possessed with devils, and he cast out the spirits with his word, and healed all the sick. Okay, so you had those who had demon possessions and those that were sick. Two classes, okay? Two different types of people. He cured both of those types. Both passages clearly distinguish the casting out of demons from the healing of the sick. So it was more than just a superstitious accommodation to superstitious views on mental illness. It was an actual spirit possession. Yes. Yes. Yes, we'll actually talk about that in just a second, but yes. In fact, Christ actually says that. There's the guy that cleans his spirit, cleans his soul, purges out. What does he do? He doesn't do anything, right? Spirit leaves his soul. It's empty. Guy comes back. The spirit comes back. There's an empty house. He brings 7 more spirits more wicked than himself, right? And the last state of that man's worse than the first. Yeah, I think there's definitely a situation, and it's man's responsibility to put things in there, and we'll talk about that, right? Giving away my points. But yes, good question and good comment. Nehemiah dispenses automatically with this theory about that demons do not belong to God's order of creation. In other words, they existed somewhere else. They came along some other means. God didn't make them, okay? Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6 says, Thou, even thou art Lord alone. Thou hast made the heaven of heaven with all their host, all the earth, and all the things that are therein, the seas, and all that is therein. And thou preservest them all. The host of heaven worship thee. Okay? That's Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6. I didn't see that he left anything out. Okay? Anything that's in heaven above, anything on earth, anything that's in the waters. God made it all. Okay? God made it all. We have a similar statement made in John chapter 1, verse 3. We also have a similar statement made in Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16 takes it even a step further, and it says both things visible and invisible. Okay? So this idea that demons are something that's not created is totally false, total foreign to the Bible. Okay, catch up with my notes. All right. There's nothing in the heavens or on the earth, but God made it. Satan and demons, therefore, are necessary. Okay, I just talked about that. Okay. Okay, open your Bibles to Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 27. Excuse me. Hope my voice holds out. Put my eyes on so I can make sure I read it. Okay. And they went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one that had authority, and not as the scribes. And there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the unclean spirit had torn him, and cried with a loud voice, he came out of him. And they were all amazed, insomuch that they questioned among themselves, saying, What thing is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority commandeth he even the unclean spirits, and they do obey him. Okay, well, why look at that? There's some things we need to learn from this passage, okay? It's a follow-up to, I guess, theory number one, that's accommodation language. First off, mental illness, okay? This demon had knowledge. He had intelligence, okay? He knew things that the Jews themselves that were in the synagogue wouldn't acknowledge, okay? The demon knew who Christ was. He addressed him, talked to him in normal language, okay? And he knew that Christ was the Son of God, the Holy One of God, I think it's actually. So we talked about, ran through both things. He had intelligence. He knew who Jesus was. He also knew that they were set for punishment, okay? He knew from his statement that, are you come to torment me before my time? Okay? Torment me, okay? He knew that he was set for punishment. The fourth thing we learned, okay, is demons were under the power of Jesus, okay? He had the ability, God has the ability, and we'll stress this a little bit later on, has the ability to control demons, okay? It's not something that they're running wild and within people and, we're helpless against them, okay? I don't know if you've seen the movie The Exorcist, but the young priest, the way he accomplishes destroying the demon is he gets the demon out of the lady into him and he kills himself, okay? Well, he should read his Bible, okay? Because that's not how the demons come out of the Bible, in the Bible, okay? All right, let's turn over to Matthew chapter 12, verses 42 through 45. In this passage, the Jews were seeking for a sign, okay? And Christ is going to give them an analogy. Well, he actually gives them the sign, talking about Jonah, but then he's going to give them an analogy, okay? And in the analogy, he actually uses demon possession, okay? Verse 42, the queen of the south shall rise up in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. Okay, we could just stop right there, okay? The Jews were asking for a sign. Christ tells them, someone greater than Solomon's here. Listen to me, okay? But then he says, verse 43, when the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he saith, I always mess up. Good thing Keith Mosier's not in this room. Is Seth, I will return into my house from whence I came out, and when he is come, he findeth it empty, swept, and garnished. Then goeth he and taketh with himself 7 more other spirits, more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so shall it be also unto this wicked generation. Down. Okay, the analogy that Christ is using. The Jews are seeking for a sign, okay? The demon leaves the man. He's gone out of the man. He seeks rest, okay? But he can't find it, all right? So the cleansed man needs to add good things to his mind, or else evil will return, and his last state will be worse than the first. Since I was yay-high to a grasshopper, knee-high to a grasshopper, okay. I've been, that's the passage that's been taught to me, okay. If you've got your heart, you've got your mind. If you think you can sit here and just be cleansed without reading and studying God's Word, you're going to find you're sliding away. You're filling your mind with evil thoughts, evil things, okay. You need to get into God's Word and study it and put those things in your mind. It's been taught from this analogy. But the aim of this analogy is to illustrate to the Jewish leaders, okay? Before the captivity, They were tied up with idols. They had gotten rid of the idolatrous worship that they were doing when they came back from captivity. But what had they done? They hadn't put the law in their hearts. They hadn't studied and fulfilled it. Instead, they replaced the idols with evil things, envy, jealousies, those type things. Okay? Materialism. And their last state is worse than what it was before they went into captivity. Guess what's going to happen in AD 70 to these people Christ is talking to? Their city, their lifestyle, it's going to be wiped from the face of the earth. Never more to return. Okay? And that's the aim. That's why he told this analogy. Okay? But it does happen to deal with demons. All right. Let's go to the guy, the legion. Let's turn over to Matthew 8, 28 through 32. Okay, we got about 18 minutes. We'll hurry. Okay. And when he was come to the other side into the country of the Gergesenes, there met him two possessed with devils, coming out of the tombs, exceeding fierce, so that no man might pass that way. And behold, he cried out, saying, What have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? Art thou come hither to torment us before the time? You getting a theme? They know who Christ is, and they know what his purpose is. Okay, he's come to pass judgment on them, right? And they know that judgment's coming at a certain time. They don't know the time, but they know it's coming. Verse 30. And there was a good way off from them an herd of many swine feeding. So the devils besought him, saying, If thou cast us out, suffer us to go away into the herd of swine. And he said unto them, Go. And when they were come out, they went into the herd of swine, and behold, the whole herd of swine ran violently down a steep place into the sea, and perished in the waters. And they that kept them fled, and went their way into the city, and told everything, and what was befallen to the possessed of the devils. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. And when they sought him, they besought him that he would depart out of their coast. Okay, leave us. Okay, let's turn over to Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5, the first 13 verses. I'm reading each one of these accounts because each one has a little bit of different slant on it. From Matthew, we see there are two guys. Okay, Mark and Luke talk about the one that was more notorious than the other guy. Okay, and that's who they concentrate on. Verse 1. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. Okay, and when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. Okay, so he's Arnold Schwarzenegger. All right. And always the night and day he was in the mountains and in the tombs crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him and cried with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding, and all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out, and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. Okay. So we're told how big the swine were, 2,000 swine. Yeah, we'll talk about the spirits in just a minute. I thought it was interesting, and I kind of read through it pretty quickly. But verse 6, when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshiped him. Okay, he ran and worshiped him. That's kind of contrary to what you see in The Exorcist, right? Get away from me, right? Okay. All right, let's turn over to Luke chapter 8, verse 26. Eight, 26 through, what am I supposed to read through? 35. Wow. And they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against Galilee. And when he went forth to land, there met him out of the city a certain man which had devils long time, and wear no clothes, neither abode in any house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God Most High? I beseech thee, torment me not. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For oftentimes it had caught him, and he was kept bound with chains and in fetters, and he brake the bands, and was driven of the devil into the wilderness. And Jesus asked him, saying, What is thy name? And he said, Legion, because many devils were entered into him. And they besought him that he would not command them to go out into the deep. I think the American Standard Version, the New American Standard, uses the term abyss. And there was there an herd of swine, many swine feeding on the mountain. And they besought him that he would suffer them to enter into them. And he suffered them. And then went the devils out of the man and entered into the swine. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the lake and were choked. And when they that fed them saw what was done, they fled, and went and told it in the city and in the country. Then they went out to see what was done, and came to Jesus, and found the man out of whom the devils were departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. They also which saw it told them by what means that he. I didn't mean to read that, but told him by what means he that was possessed of the devils was healed. Okay, each account kind of gives a little different idea or some different details than the others, but when you put them all together, they're harmonious, okay? And they give you a pretty precise picture of what's going on. You have two men. One was much more notorious than the other. Okay, two men that were possessed. The men possessed of demons were superhumanly strong. At least the one notorious guy was. Okay, he'd been bound with chains. He could break the chains. Okay, now, when I read that, I'm not picturing the little half-inch chains. I'm picturing the big 2-inch thick chains. Okay, but I don't know. They actually had iron chains back then, like we have today. But that's my mind. Excuse me. But not only were they strong, but they were fierce and vicious. Okay, they actually inflicted pain on people. They dwelt among the tombs. Rex Turner, he's kind of biased in a little bit in his belief of what these spirits are, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And he says that means that they had mortal tenements, affinity for mortal tenements. In other words, he thinks, hey, they're men. But we'll talk about that. The demons recognized and addressed Jesus as the Son of God, and they worshiped him. Okay? They worshiped him. Their question, art thou come hither to torment us before our time? Okay? Shows there's two things. One, they're under a sentence of punishment. It's going to happen. Okay? They're going to be punished at some point. Okay? The second thing is there's a certain or specific time. Okay? Nowhere in the scriptures does it indicate when that time is. Okay? For the demons, and definitely for mankind, the end of the judgment day. In fact, Matthew chapter 24 tells us that no man knows except the Father which is in heaven. Okay? And maybe that's a prying question from them to try to get an idea of when that time's coming. How much more do they have to roam? Okay. A legion of demons possessed one man. Okay? Legion can mean a vast host or a great number. Okay? The Roman army, back in the earlier days of the Roman Empire, a legion consisted of 3,000 men. Okay? At the time of Christ, it was around 6,000 men that were in a legion. Okay? We actually read from the scriptures that there were 2,000 herd of swine, so that's probably a good number, 2,000 evil spirits, one for each swine. Maybe a couple of them joined. It could have been 3,000, could have been 6,000. They did not want Jesus to cast them into the abyss. They wanted to be cast into swine. I don't know what that meant, okay? If they're cast into the swine, they run down the hill, we know what happens to the swine, they die, okay? Is that the spirit's released and free to go into someone else? It's probably what that means, okay? Whereas the abyss is actually talks about the things from Jude chapter 6, or Jude verse 6, about being imprisoned, okay? And maybe that was the case. They would go back into Hades, the Hadean world, or be placed into, locked in chains, waiting for the judgment day. Talked about the swine ran down. Jesus casting the demons out of the man, okay? They made him whole, okay? They made the man whole. He was in his right mind. He sat at Jesus' feet. I don't think we read this, but he prayed that he might accompany Jesus. I think I cut it off a little bit, but he wanted to go with Jesus and follow him around. Okay. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people do that. You don't know, you don't understand, you just get it away from me. Unfortunately, you see that a lot with the scriptures. Presented to them Christ. This was the people of the city, yes, that wanted that. Yeah, they wanted Christ to leave their countryside, leave the city. They didn't want him around. And it could be he might attract more demon-possessed men. But I think it was more fearful that they wanted him to leave. All right, we've got 5 minutes. I've got 5 theories, and we probably won't get through them. We'll dispense with 3 of them really quickly. Rex Turner, I keep wanting to call him Rex Island, but Rex Turner has divided into 5 theories. The first theory comes from a misinterpretation, a faulty interpretation from Job chapter 1, verse 6. Job chapter 1, verse 6 actually refers to sons of God as angels. And they start with that passage. They run over to Genesis chapter 6, verse 2. They lift that passage out of that phrase out of that passage and say, well, that's the angels, okay? They came in among the daughters of men, and they created this superhuman race, which really is evil spirits, okay? Well, now wait a second. First off, they're way off base to look at Genesis chapter 6, verse 2 as referring to angels. That passage actually in context refers to the descendants of Seth, okay, men, as being the sons of God. Adam's descendants being sons of God. They also run roughshod over some other passages which clearly teach otherwise. Matthew chapter 22, verse 20. Mark chapter 12, verse 25. Luke chapter 20, verses 35 and 36. Talks about the fact that angels are not created for marriage. Okay? It's not in their, if you want to say in their DNA, in their makeup, they don't have that gene. Okay? That's not how they were made by God. And it's pretty clear. The second theory, and this is just as false, but this is talks about a pre-Adamic race. In other words, you had the initial creation. It was totally evil. God wiped it out. And when you look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, it talks about the earth was void, a wasteland. Okay? And then God started the right creation, us. Okay? Well, it's not anywhere in the scriptures that you have that. In fact, you find other places in the scriptures, and I'll give you just one verse. Matthew 19, verse 4, talks about Adam and Eve. Okay? Jesus said, when God created them in the beginning, male and female, he created them, right? In the beginning. Right at that point in time was when that race, us, was created. There was no other gap theory, and we can go all day on the evolution idea, trying to get this gap theory rationalized. It just doesn't exist. You won't get it from the scriptures. The third one, Rex Turner and Jack Cochran kind of deviate a little bit. Rex breaks it into two categories. You have those spirits before Noah's time, and you have the evil men that existed since that time. I'm going to treat them both the same. He does give some different arguments for the ones before the flood. You definitely look at 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 20, and you know during the time that Peter wrote his book, those spirits were in prison. They weren't on the earth roaming the earth free. Okay, because when Christ was crucified, he went to the Hadean world, and they saw him at that time. And that was after these events of demon possession that we have going on here. I'll leave it to you. We'll actually read, we probably won't read through that, but anyway, the idea behind it is that the evil spirits of wicked men were allowed to leave the Hadean world, roam the earth for a period of time, and take up residence in other people. Okay, if the other people allowed them to be in them. And a fifth theory is, or fourth theory in Cochran's book, is that the demons were the evil spirits of this creation. In other words, angels that fell with Satan, his messengers, so to speak, and that they were set for punishment. They were allowed to roam the earth after, and then enter into men and possess them. At the end of the day, there's a lot of theories as to what these people were. These evil spirits were, but the source of the demons, it's not revealed. Okay, a bunch of theories that are out there that float around, and be quite honest, whatever theory you want to take on who they were, it's just as good as my theory, or just as good as anybody else's. We're not told. We're just told that they were evil spirits, they were demons that possessed people. Okay, and that brings us to the bell ringing and about demon possession today. I'm going to read Rex Turner's comment, and this would be a good place to stop. He says, the question which always comes to the fore has to do with whether or not men are possessed with demons today, and if not, what is the inference? What is the explanation for their not being so possessed? I better get my glasses on so I can read. Okay. To answer, the strong inference is that demons were permitted to escape from the abyss prior to the coming of Christ, and then time for men to be very aware of their presence, so that Christ and the apostles could demonstrate by miracles their power over the entire evil spirit world. Further, the strong inference is that when the miraculous age of the church came to a close, the demons were limited to the abyss, and that therefore there could be no demon possession today. When the miraculous age of the church had passed, when all truth had been revealed and confirmed, there was no further need for the presence of demons. Christ and the apostles had sufficiently demonstrated their power over them. Len McMillan has a similar comment. Jack Cottrell actually takes the point that, and I kind of tend with Jack Cottrell in the fact that not demon possession, but there is an evil spirit available that's around in this world. You just have to go 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, and it's Satan, okay? He's walking around seeking whom he may devour. Yes, Brother Rufus. Tower, yes. Yes, you do. I leave you with a couple verses. Matthew chapter 8, verses 16 through 17 show that the purpose of demon possession in the New Testament age was for Christ to fulfill the word spoken by Isaiah, to show his power over it. Luke chapter 11, verse 20, Christ says, "But if I with the finger of God cast out devils, no doubt the kingdom of God has come unto you." That was the purpose of demon possession back in the New Testament time, to show to the Jews who Christ was, that he was the Son of God. And he's already showed it, folks. He's already done the sacrifice. We just need to read his word and believe it. No need for demons today. Thank you very much, and hope you have a good week, and we'll talk next week, Lord willing.